But that answers that question. You can touch this pretty easily. Um, yeah. So they screen, they had your eyes. Screen. Oh, okay. I'm gonna, if you're gonna do it, I'm gonna make sure that I keep it on. Count how much to like do work. I wouldn't. If I was you. If these are working out, it's very, basically, you're just. Yeah. And then as soon as you. Okay, that's like. Yeah, I have to do the writing reflections on it. Yeah. I'm not a big issue either, but like, I did talk to her and I'm like, what's kind of, yeah, and I'm like, that's like that day or something. She's like, I totally understand, there are no essays. Like, she had art stage. The best I've never like, can't even like read the stuff. Yeah. I'm not confused the writing things. Like, yeah, I would not, if ever. Yeah. Since it's all very coded. Oh. Just so I like. Right now. I guess, so these are headings. Yeah, thanks. It could just be. I guess if it's like, yes, yeah, like what they think, but it's. Oh, but then you can go. I think it's supposed to be like sheet. Yes. That makes sense. But then, yeah, like, but is it? Still all the same. Yeah, so I think. Yeah. I would make sure they have to do it all together. Nice. Because, yeah, and I wish you. In general, yeah. Yeah, we should go around. Like I like that they have, they have like your, just like up. Like on this, opening. Yeah. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we just. I'm trying to like. It's like. Oh, yeah. Well, I want to. Yes, I want to. It's interesting. And they kind of like. Yes, all written down there. I just really. I just remember that. Yeah, I think it's. I don't even have a bullet journal. The most, but I do like having. Something like week that like I could put it. Exactly. I always have a guide. That's why I get over to 5 days. Yeah, I use the task. Yeah. I'm a very.
Yeah, do you want me to shut it down?
Anyway.
Thank you all for coming. It's my pleasure to introduce Garrett Griffith. Garrett Griffith serves as the head of document delivery services at Indiana University Bloomington, where he specializes in interlibrary loan and related services, which center around the borrowing and lending of materials. His research interests focus on AI and leveraging technology to improve workflows and information tracking. He is actively involved in both state and international committees, serving as a member of the mentorship committee for academic libraries of Indiana and as a member of the ALA Russell Stars Awards and Recognition Committee. Garrett received his MLS with a specialization in rare books and manuscripts from Indiana University Bloomington in 2019. He also holds a BA in English literature from the University of Alabama at Birmingham.
So, yes, my name is Garrett Griffith, and I'm the head of document delivery services at Indiana University Bloomington. I'm the visiting librarian over there. This presentation actually places me at the 1-year mark in my tenure in the role. So IUB is a public research university classified as R1, so a doctoral university with very high research activity. And between undergraduates, graduates, we have 48,000 plus students, 10,000 or so staff and faculty. So all of that is to say that our interlibrary loan department is high volume. It's kept very busy, fulfilling upwards of 32,000 requests per year. And the department is myself as head, the borrowing supervisor with 2 full-time staff and 5 students, and the lending supervisor with 2 full-time staff and 7 students reporting to them. So pretty evenly spread across the 2 sides. Okay. Cool. So here's our agenda for the day, with our central topics, beginning with the problem, which was our documentation, and moving into my approach to remedy the problem, basically using the project as a chance to become more familiar with AI on a professional level, and then geek out a little bit over different organizational methods and platforms. So I wanted to test the waters with AI to see what my options were and get the most value out of it. So for platforms, I'm a bit constrained here due to the desire to keep costs low. Or non-existent, but I was still able to make a lot of progress and improvements with what I selected. Then we'll move into taking all the things gained from the use of AI and the chosen platform and talk about building out the updated manuals and documentation, making everything work together. Then we'll recap questions, and as a fun aside, the AI generated image has a typo, not a perfect system. It always is fun to me, but it's getting way better. Okay, so what exactly is the problem? In my situation, I entered a department where the former head had been there for a great deal of time. I'm unsure of the exact time, but I found Copyright Clearance Center invoices in my desk from the mid-80s, so a while. And she had recently retired, and the lending supervisor had left for another role at IU at the same time. So needless to say, there was a fair amount of knowledge gaps, incomplete or non-existent documentation, documents that you couldn't determine if they were still relevant or not. And then some information concerning important aspects like billing were siloed to specific staff members and not written out, or they were just missing key steps when you went to do the procedure. So one example is we had to write from scratch how to generate our monthly reports and our quarterly statistics for the lending side. With all that said, I think we were still in pretty good shape with the documentation. There was enough pieces to figure out the puzzle over time. Okay, so concerning structure, we didn't have any templates or guidance for how documents should be created and modified across the department. This meant that every person that created or edited something did so in a way that was inconsistent with all the previous methods. Considering the amount of people making edits throughout the years, the naming conventions, tables, how steps were laid out, et cetera, became increasingly messy to parse out, especially when we were onboarding staff or just needing quick reference. So files were spread across multiple shared drives and on SharePoint. Some files were localized to specific computers and not shared at all. So we had multiple manuals with similar entries for tasks, but with different steps and processes and limited version history to know what was the most recent, what was the most up to date. Because our files were spread across shared drives and limited mostly to Word docs, searching and discovering what you needed when you needed it, constant pain point. Okay, so one of the problems is the sheer number of instructions for certain tasks. Policies had changed throughout the years and did so quite rapidly during the pandemic. So processes were often added to rather than reviewed closely to trim things down over time. So a lot of historical information for how things operated were included in places that weren't needed. And it was clear that a large component of the project would center around simply good documentation practices. So AI seemed like an interesting way to get the conversation started on how to establish a foundation and templates for like building and rebuilding, right? So we were looking for ways to address poor search capabilities, general fragmentation of information across documents, and I wanted to build a streamlined information system here that interacted with each component in the simplest and most direct way. So that would ensure less hunting for a specific piece of information, and it would provide stability, flexibility, and just general ease of use. Okay, so my approach involved assessing AI tools and content platforms to remedy the fragmented documentation. So AI was going to be used for general planning and assessment of the project and any additional tools and software like the content platform. And I needed a strong content platform that would be easy to use, good for structuring manuals and the like, preferably free or already paid for. Fortunately, IUB has a lot of tools available to us. So I had things that I could look into that I already had access to. I do recommend using AI to provide initial pros and cons for platforms and asking it how to get the most out of what you select. And my initial approach to AI was to see what possibilities it could provide in planning the project, assessing the problem, providing solutions, and then providing structure to the manuals. Essentially, the platform becomes the foundation, and then the AI is for everything else before the project starts, like all the outlining, planning, and then helps you throughout the project. For us, it was considerations of cost, access, using what you have, versatility, and using a program that is highly valuable in another part of the library or at your institution. This simply helps you ensure that you have access. You don't lose it at some point because other people are relying on it too. So first, what can AI do for this project and similar ones, and why even attempt to use it? So this is an excellent low stakes project to get a feel for AI capabilities and to figure out how to navigate the back and forth conversations with AI. So if you've been reluctant to try it professionally, this presentation can at least get you pointed in a good direction. Reworking internal documentation doesn't have a deadline, but it gives you time, it gives you flexibility to experiment, and you can dive into it as deeply as you want as you become familiar with the documents. As you are familiar with the documents you're feeding into the system, right? So in our case, we're the experts in our domain. We're better positioned to vet whatever we're putting into AI and what it's repeating back to us. And we can see where those like anomalies are appearing, kind of see how AI is taking information, kind of manipulating it in good ways and then getting it wrong in other areas. And AI has a tendency sometimes to get stuck in this information loop where you feed the document, it's processing, it gives you a good thing, and then you ask a follow-up question, and then it just freaks out and it gets stuck in this thing. It's very hard to get it out. There are other use cases than what's listed here, but this at least gives some general possibilities. Okay, so part of the reason this is a good project to dabble in AI is that most people's manuals are classified in a way that allows you to try different AI tools. So for instance, our manuals do not contain any restricted or critical data. You'll want to check with your institution's data classification policy and their AI policy to confirm what your options are. For IU, public data can be loaded into any AI, but we can only use Copilot for the university internal data, for instance. So information that can be easily scraped from the web, like knowledge bases, which I've, knowledge bases for things like Iliad for our case. Wouldn't necessitate using Copilot, you can use anything at that point, right? Because the information is already online. In our case, we found better results with ChatGPT, and we used that for planning and assessment of things like the pros and cons of different platforms. And then we swapped over to Copilot for anything that we didn't want to share with ChatGPT, right? So Microsoft Copilot and IU have an agreement which provides a certain level of data protection. Your institutions may have a similar type of thing. Usually we're kind of already indoctrinated in Microsoft, so it kind of follows suit. Okay, so AI is far better as a planning tool, less so considering it an authorship tool, right? So it can generate full-blown papers and articles for people, but the ethics of this are obviously incredibly problematic. So instead, think of AI as a tool for creating summaries, creating outlines, discovering the pros and cons of different approaches or different software options. It's basically a tool that you can actively bounce back ideas in real time. So it's excellent at giving recommendations, and you can have a conversation about what you're looking for, what the limiting factors are, and it will adjust its recommendations accordingly. So it's a great time saver so that you don't spin your wheels on exploring an option that would have never been a good. So general time saving, right? So I'm oftentimes most pleased with AI outputs during an idea generation session. So when I'm going back and forth with it and we're introducing something that, like why this can work, why it cannot work, then we can start exploring different paths. That's probably where its strengths most lie. So my high-level uses of AI are here, the main ones at least. Essentially, I used it to figure out how to approach the number of documents I had across a large span of time, decades. And it provided actual applications to review for where the documents would reside. I provided all the different considerations that I had up to the point and asked it to identify any potential knowledge gaps, so the things that I'm missing when I'm trying to plan out what I need to do. So when I felt like I'd reached a good stage in the process, I had to provide an outline for the order in which I would approach things, or the best way to approach the things. So in the building phase, for example, accessibility, right? So I used AI to be a little bit more proactive. Since the cost was low, considering I was already restructuring everything, I'm revising everything, why not make it accessible while I'm going through it? Because, So it provided, in this case, it provided recommendations for headers, general formatting, all text for images, when and where to adjust things, gave me a good overview, was able to give me detail where I needed it. So I could just figure out, okay, this is a place I need to spend a little bit more time on. I also had to provide very brief summaries of all the documents, so I could place it at the top of every document. Best for long form ones, but it would at least give you like that cursory as you're going. You blast through the top if something seems like it's relevant, but it's not certain. But you don't want to sit here and read, here's the 20 steps to do X, Y, Z. Yeah, so I found it very helpful in providing a sounding board for working through different solutions and considerations prior to introducing anything for staff feedback, for instance. So a good option to help iterate on something without involving additional people too early in the process. Oh God. Success. So these names are probably familiar to you, as they are some of the major players in the space. Maybe Claude is a new one. So right now we're in the early years where the technology is exploding, and everyone's highly focused on building AIs that are broad general ones, but also highly specialized and focused ones. So the major players and a handful of specialized AI will probably be where the cards ultimately land at the end of the big AI experiment, where people are pumping a lot of money and time and effort into it, when it kind of just coalesces and evens out. These will probably still be relevant. So along with considering your institution's data classification policy from earlier, you will also want to take into account what each AI is best at, and discover which ones give you the best outputs based on how you interact with it. Part of it is how you communicate, what your style is, the types of language that you use with it. ChatGPT and Copilot can be excellent for general planning of a thing and bouncing those ideas back and forth. I found Copilot to be a bit impatient with how it responds. So oftentimes it will provide an answer before it really considers all of the context, which is something to keep in mind. So ChatGPT really excels in that regard. It's willing to take more into consideration before giving a thorough response. So even when prompted to wait and ask exploratory questions, Copilot will still be too impatient with its response. It tends to give you a little bit more general and generic answers because of that. But ChatGPT, the opposite. So a lot of that is figuring out what the tendencies of each AI are. So I opted to give Claude its own slide, just in case people aren't familiar with the tool. I would consider it closer to ChatGPT and how it responds to context and exploratory questions versus, say, Copilot. But it's hands down the best way I found to provide summaries, key points, general takeaways of any material. So this worked great for our case, where we're using it for longer form documentation or knowledge-based information that's dense, that could benefit from an opening short summary. It's also great as an aside for loading articles and web pages into for general takeaways. So when you need to, those types of things where you want to ask follow-up questions, for instance. So say you load an article about accessibility into it, and it covers accessibility across multiple sections, you can ask it to kind of consolidate all of that from across the larger article just for the accessibility sections, and then you can have an active conversation with it about that material. It's good for like a quick analysis and then having a back and forth about it without having to read an article that maybe 50% of it's not really relevant for what you need. Claude is also a good one for when you need a general overview, but you're time crunched. So doing lit reviews, kind of just figuring out what's out there and available. So you have some AI options, but how do you produce better results, better inputs? So this one's a really important slide. Pick a good framework that guides you in creating effective prompts, also known as prompt engineering. This will help you with every major interaction with AI beyond the simple one-off questions that are here and there. So the framework I've chosen for this example is Risen. And typically with ChatGPT and similar AI, typing a straight question will give you some information, but it will be general, generic, broad in its initial response to these. So it's easy to think that maybe AI simply isn't good for your use case, but it's just a user skill gap that you can't bridge. So for role, I'm just going to give an example and then of what it actually needs. So for role, you can say you're a professional librarian at a university. Role is very important. That one's like a must put into it. AI needs to be grounded in context, and a role definer is very helpful. So instructions, you can tell it, write a project description about X, Y, Z. You just want to be clear and direct here. The plainer the language, the better, as long as it covers what you need. For steps, you want to start, you can say start with an engaging aspect of the project, provide 3 central points with potential examples, and finish strong with a way to get the project supported by others. So you can have a lot of detail here, and you want to give it steps like you're delegating to a colleague, right? So I need it to be, an itemized list, essentially, like A, B, C. Walk it through what it needs to do. When you get end goals, this is where you tell it what the expectations are, what you're looking for. So the project, in our case, meant for improving onboarding of staff at a university library. And then finally, narrowing. So you want to provide constraints. This can be word limits. It can be saying, hey, don't use flowery language, don't use excessive jargon, that type of thing. But you want to keep it as focused and controlled as you can. And finally, after you generate the prompts, save them. They are assets. And this can be simply, saving them to a notepad for later use, like that. But you're doing more of the work up front here to figure out how to build out the projects, the articles, the guides, even email responses, templates, any of that. But you want to save the effort down the road. So again, you can save it into a Note app, adjust it, apply it later. But you want to try to build a library of prompts that are specific to your use case, your role, what you're doing at your institution to save time in the long run. Okay, so AI memory features. So ChatGPT has introduced a feature known as memory. It remembers different details across content. So if you tell it something that could be useful in a future interaction, it will store that information. You do have the option to remove the whole information or delete a memory or say, remember this, but don't remember this. The benefit here will be you're cutting down on the work involved with inputting information, inputting additional prompts. The AI will build context across conversations over time to know the types of preferences you have or what projects you're actively working on. So with Copilot, it's less possible here that each interaction is largely independent. So past chats don't get recalled. Good for privacy purposes or where you don't really want it to have that context. But if you do want it to have the context and kind of move across conversations, ChatGPT is very good at doing that right now. So for example, I can have one chat about a project asking for potential software for structuring documents, right? And then I can have another chat about open access, open educational resources, and the software or the web platform like Pressbooks gets brought up, right? So when I mention that my institution has access to that, when I go back to that first conversation, ChatGPT will recall that. And if I ask it for further, software that I can use, it will say, oh, have you considered Pressbooks? Because it knows you own it, you have access to it at your institution, and it knows that it can still work for that other project as well. So it will start kind of crossing over its recommendations over time. So basically, interconnected capabilities over time because of that memory feature, rather. Okay, so the next thing to solve is the platform you use for storing and presenting your manuals. Here, I just wanted a low barrier to entry as I needed to get my lending and borrowing supervisors onboarded and accustomed to manipulating data on the platform. So I also needed to make sense. I needed it to make sense to the staff who would be accessing and referencing the data throughout the daily work, not necessarily building things into it. So I was looking for something that would allow me to section off information in ways that made sense. For us, that was students, general staff, staff supervisors, department head, and then borrowing and lending sides. Just general broad kind of things to section. Version control is important so that we knew who edited what and when it was last touched. And then permissions access so that we could approach tiered control of information. So the head would have the highest level. My 2 supervisors would be over editing their respective sides, borrowing and lending, and then read permissions for just general access to the rest of the staff. So one thing to consider for free platforms is the limited number of users that are allowed. Depending on your staff, that may not be a big deal. Some of them go all the way up to 10. I noticed a lot of free platforms did that. Just depends what works for you. So let's see, stability, that's just represented with general uptime. If it plays well with different browsers, Firefox, Chrome, etc. Importing, that was a good one for saving time. Most of our information was in Word docs, so having something that can import that is valuable to us. And then finally, exporting, simply because you don't want it locked into some proprietary format that you end up losing access to over time. Okay, so in addressing organization and access of our documentation, here's some of the thoughts I had about possibilities. This can simply be brainstorming what you think you need or conversing with AI, in my case, to see what types of things are out there. So the focus here will be on identifying your needs, your potential wants, what the deal breakers are. Often people are willing to let go of certain wants or nice to haves in favor of avoiding additional costs. So something to bear in mind. There are several options in the space of content platforms, and the final selection depends on your specific needs and the complexity of your information. So department manuals generally pretty, low order complexity. You also want to consider, like earlier, how many people you need to have access to it. So with internal department manuals, scale is very small. But there are content management systems, documentation tools, knowledge management systems, wikis, and the like that can scale it for sizes. It just depends on how many people you need to be able to see it, especially simultaneously. So no matter what avenue you go, best practices here for implementation should focus on 1, centralized storage, 2, consistent naming conventions, good metadata, good tagging, version control for regular updates and maintenance, and then just something that user training, right? So that you don't add more barriers to just getting to information. So the first platform that stood out as a possibility, brought it up earlier, Pressbooks. We have access to IU, it's used for open educational resources. So finding tools heavily relied on by others gives a higher chance of retaining the tool. So our catalog of created material currently has everything from courses, lab manuals, guides, magazines, like the catalog for Pressbooks. The presentation and the layout of information for the web version, they call them webbooks, is very clean with Pressbooks. It looks very nice. You can save any section of the PDF or Word document. It's got a table of contents baked in. You can easily create an introduction section. The support for images and links are also very good. So types of things you expect in a manual. The webbooks are designed to be accessible and compatible with screen readers and other assistive technologies out the gate. So it really sets things up to make it accessible as you're inputting data. So it's a good tool to be familiar with if you have access to it. And you can create some really good manuals and just good materials outright. There's a ton of knowledge guides, knowledge bases, user guides, things like that everywhere on this tool. So you can get up to speed really fast. And it's a really straightforward thing to use. So Pressbooks is simpler in its approach versus something like a wiki style platform. But if that's not a deal breaker because your document, your document complexity isn't like through the roof, it's a really good one. So more advanced is Confluence. So it's far more advanced than Pressbooks, but it leans into a web-based wiki style that's ideal for internal use. So wikis are familiar to people. Wikipedia has been a cornerstone for quick information access for going on 2 decades now. So staff may be less resistant to using it just because it's kind of baked into their internet usage already. So along with the pros and cons here for the free version, you can also create a linked environment across systems. This was of high interest to me for creating a file repository elsewhere, but linking within Confluence whenever necessary. There are also nice layout and section options for each page. There's labels, tables, ability to link pages to one another, and you can import via Word documents, which is where, once again, the bulk of our materials reside. So some of the use cases here, an internal knowledge base of your documentation for better onboarding of new team members, improved reference materials, controllable access, so that you can set permission tiers for everyone. It's relatively easy to manage workflows. It's centralized current documentation, and you can keep historical documents like we did separate from the others, just in case you ever need to reference and pull it back in to the main guides. Also note that if you do have access to the full version of Confluence, IU does, you can set permissions and restrictions for literally every single page. So every parent page and child page, if you want to have more granular control. So free options. Some of these have improved paid variants, and there are open source things in the wild, like MediaWiki. That's the platform that behind Wikipedia, essentially. Many of these are lightweight, or they're good for very small teams, like TiddlyWiki. Fun name to say. Others are more suite heavy, like Google Workspaces, that serve as alternatives to Microsoft variants. The divide I've frequently noticed tended to be some things were more wiki-based content management, and some things were more note-taking document-based. So it just depends on which way you want to go and what feels right. So both OneNote and Notion are great for organizing notes and documents across a notebook or database respectively. Notion's got a steeper learning curve for the person building out the initial templates, but after that is done, learning curve is non-existent. Like, it's easy to get people to be onboarded and use it. OneNote is very direct in how it has it set up, so it's very page, sub-page, tree structure, straightforward. So you can get started quickly with it without needing to go through a bunch of guides. So if you just need to start moving material, it's totally viable. They both have strong searching capabilities. They both have good organizational possibilities, table support, so forth. So all of these options are good for collaborative documentation as well. And yeah, just generally really valid options here. So paid options. There's a lot of interesting tools in this space that I've only had an opportunity to dabble with very sparingly. So the previous entries, like Notion, for instance, the paid iteration is far more capable, especially AI feature wise. It's very, it's got a lot of plugins, AI search capabilities that are like baked in, and plugins for AI related things in these types of programs have been ongoing for the past 2 years. So they clearly, if you look at maps with software, that is the priority. That's where they're spending their time. There are other integrative solutions like Nuclino, which offer a unified workspace for collaborative documentation and knowledge management. Also has an emphasis on AI search features. Really, these types of software go beyond the simpler demand I had of better structuring, simplifying documentation, centralizing it to a location. They're really meant for project management, for a hub for teams to like do whiteboards, tasks, team sharing type things like that. But it is viable and possible to do just, documentation, reference, and onboarding materials in it. It just costs money. So, but they do set the bar for what AI-powered platforms can do. Very streamlined interfaces, clutter-free layouts, very fast, accurate search capabilities. So they can be very impressive. I promise I will get this. There. So often Microsoft and Google tools become the standard due to the ease of access and just existing contracts with their institutions. At IU Libraries, SharePoint is utilized by the administration, HR, financial services, etc. And our department already had a page hosting our statistics, and we had an internal page that wasn't being utilized. So I didn't really explore file storage options because this was a secure method for us. There weren't any major negatives in relation to this project or our workflows. For simple file storage and linking, SharePoint's a perfectly acceptable choice, right? So very much a case of use the tools that you have that are already heavily relied on in other areas so that you limit losing access to anything. And if you recall from earlier, the Confluence allows you to create a linked environment across different systems, right? So the route I chose is simpler in its approach. So I uploaded, statistics, historical documents, general non-instruction things to SharePoint, and then I created links within Confluence. I had main manuals in Confluence, and then SharePoint could just be this external file repository where I can find what I need directly linked within Confluence. So it didn't feel as separate, right? There is a way to explore deeper integration here between Confluence and SharePoint if required. And if you do follow that or pursue that, which I didn't, it does allow viewing SharePoint files directly within Confluence, vice versa. So it can feel even more integrated than popping up another tab or another document for you to look at. For me, I simply just needed to, at this point, link the two together. And I didn't care if it was opening in the same system or not. So connecting everything together. This was just for our department. I didn't want to spend money. So using free or already available options probably where most of us lean on a project like this, I would imagine. The trade-off is having to connect everything together yourself to form a whole and make it a little more streamlined. So you have to smooth out the issues and whatnot. So you need things to feel seamless, stable, because the whole thing is to reduce frustration with finding information. Paid options are, as you would expect from earlier, they're more feature-rich, they have a lower barrier to entry. The best ones are designed to get out of your way and feel intuitive. The connecting work is often done for you as a single tool, providing everything in one environment. And there's less to learn, less compromises to make, and you're not spread out across different applications. So the problem is many tools and applications with AI are mired in that annual subscription cost that's just, it doesn't make sense at this type of scale. So asking AI for a step-by-step can be beneficial here, but mostly this is just loading content to the platform, getting AI's input as you go along, and linking everything to the file repository so it feels more integrated. Okay, so wrapping up, so this is a great starter project to experiment with the AI, given the low stakes involved. You can chip away at this over time. You can improve key sections of your department processes first and foremost. So you can prioritize what is making the most impact or referencing most frequently. It doesn't involve a bunch of moving pieces, or multiple people, or data sets that would slow things down and create additional hurdles, which you want to try and avoid when you're learning a new tool like AI, right? So when you're using that Risen framework, you don't really want to have additional complexities distracting your attention from that. So think of it as a chance to play with AI without involving higher class data like restricted or critical institutional data. And this will give you a more general flexibility to try a bunch of different AIs to see what each use case can be, like Copilot, Claude, ChatGPT, and so forth. You can figure out what works, what doesn't work there. So basically, this is a general introduction to AI possibilities for those hesitant to interact with AI in a professional context, or simply those who haven't found time to do so, which was me up to this point. Department manuals are low stakes, they're low risk as far as data privacy concerns. Even if your file platform is already suitable for your needs, AI can be used to add clarity, summaries for quick overviews, and improve general organization. For me, this was a great testing bed for what AI can do with already created content. I could see how it considers and restructures content and what missteps it would make along the way. For the most part, it could strip out overly verbose language without losing important elements of whatever the process was that I was inputting into it. The immediate value comes from learning how prompt engineering works, making a trial and error approach with whatever frameworks you choose. So in this case, I tested out the Risen method. I know conversing with AI can be a strange process because it's much more conversational than we're accustomed to when working with technology, especially considering something like, our history with search engines, right? It's difficult to do a 180, find yourself required to have a potentially long-form conversation in natural language with technology. And particularly odd when you have to tell it great job with thanks to reinforce its sensibilities and give better feedback. So while the project is still ongoing, having a partner in AI to work through possibilities and make improvements has been an interesting and ultimately helpful experience. They helped with assessing a platform for file storage and linking, improved content in a multitude of ways with general editing and language choice, and improved the flow of our instruction sets. It does require time to get accustomed to how it receives and interprets information and how it's best positioned for your specific use case. So bear in mind that the upfront cost does mean that future related work and general use of AI will be lower as far as like what you need to do. Hopefully it will just become another tool in your toolbox. So here's my end solution. You may want to consider a good backup strategy just in case. For us, that's exporting Word documents to a shared drive for redundancy purposes because we already have that system in place. I'm gonna do it one time. Solid. Okay. We focused on only giving it information that related to assessing and structuring the project in each of its stages. We also limited data to what could be scraped from general knowledge bases earlier, like Iliad in our case. So things across the web applications we use. Confluence gave us enough possibilities to structure our documentation well, and it's already utilized across different units of the campus. So it kind of is a easy threshold, and we didn't mind looking at a wiki, for instance. If you dislike wikis and you're looking for more AI-powered search capabilities, you want to look at other options. And for us, SharePoint, which I already started as one of the stats repository for other departments to access. So we just double down with that. Okay, so some additional tools to explore depending on what you're trying to achieve. There's an AI for that, aggregates all of the different AI options into one search bar. So you can see when they launched, overviews, change logs to track updates, pros and cons, potential alternatives. It's just a really good thing to search through AI possibilities, and it can get as specific as you need it to. So if you need a math AI, it has like 30 to suggest. And then Tango is a workflow capturing software. It uses AI to quickly generate walkthroughs, screenshots, annotations, descriptions that auto-generate, and then you can go through and fix it and change it. But it can rapid fire build out a tutorial for like a website, for instance. So if you're trying to tell patrons, hey, this is where you need to go, this is what you need to look at, it will build out a fully fleshed out in minutes, and then you can just refine it. The paid version allows you to do the same with software. So we could do something like that with Iliad, for instance, if we wanted to get employee walkthroughs, but the free version works for websites, for anything. It's just a browser plugin, like an extension. Okay, so for links and references, everything that I talked about is here. I do want to call attention to some additional things. So first is the AI text prompt guide by Harvard. It's a nice write-up. It's an overview of creating better prompts. Very simple, very straightforward. The prompt library by AI for Education is a great resource for all levels of education. So course-related prompts, meeting agenda prompts, professional development, admin, all those things are here. They're already created for you, so you can kind of explore what other people have made. Could save you time. And then I've included a link to the Risen framework and also to the Prompt Frameworks collection. That has literally every major framework I've come across. So if you don't like Risen or it's not working for you with the role assignments and whatnot, there's something there that will probably click better. Okay.
So we have a question from the chat.
Sure.
It says, how long did the process of updating and simplifying your manual take you?
Good question. It is still ongoing. So the project started in the summer, and only recently have I actually had time to start doubling down and going through things. So I haven't completed either the borrowing or the lending side, but I am much further along with the borrowing. Our documentation there was really much more rock solid. So when I was testing out AI possibilities, it seemed the place to start. But yeah, it's going to take a bit, especially as I'm figuring out what's still relevant, what's not. I hope I've come across everything in the past year that I need to know, but you never know.
And you're determining what's relevant and what's not yourself.
Me and like the indecision, yes,
Yeah.
but also more of like every email I've received in the past year, every contact point. We also have two people in the one person on the borrowing side has been there for a long time and is very big on documentation, and they've been really good at keeping things up to date. And then on the lending side, since we were kind of rebuilding, we still had one staff member who had been there for 20 years. So they still had, through osmosis, a lot of institutional knowledge, but a lot of siloed knowledge, right? So some of it's not written down, some of it's just on their computer. So I've kind of been picking their brains too and running processes across their desks to be like, hey, how relevant is this? Is this still what we do? Is it not? Because I've also been trying to make efficiencies, right? So anytime I can review something because we've been doing it because it's basically tradition at that point, or it was just how it was taught, and nobody's looked their way since about it. So yeah, making refinements, trimming the fat, that type of thing.
So AI isn't necessarily helpful with that part.
No, people help with
Yeah.
that part. But once I figure out what I actually do need, AI has helped refine the language because
Okay.
I don't know how it is for everyone else in the room, but a lot of our documents are written very rapid fire, especially when people are about to leave. So when we were having the head and the lending supervisor leave, they threw a lot down on paper quickly, rapidly, haphazardly, and so yeah, it kind of helps flesh out that language and then simplify it in other ways.
So our team of about 10 people just spent 9 months creating a manual from scratch by hand, no use of AI.
Sure.
But hypothetically, if we wanted to improve it and do some of the things you were talking about like the searchability of it and such, would you just take sections and send it through, or would you, like, how would that make
If
it
I'm-
look if you're
yeah.
improving an existing document?
If I'm not going the paid option, and I'm kind of just using AI to make refinements, I'd probably do it section by section. Tends to make the most sense. Part of the reason why I was using Confluence too is like the platform to host it was simply me manually creating good sections and dividers so that the organization of the information felt really complete. And the reason why I did that was if I had an AI paid option and I had a whole system where I could just plug everything into, well, you can put it in much more messy because the search is going to be really good for you. But I didn't have access to that, so.
Did that harbor the one resource you provided from, like the prompt engineering? Did that go over how to improve the searchability?
They can. Yeah, so you can, give it the role assignment, tell it what it is, and start giving it like a delegating task again, what you're exactly looking for. And you can even feed in some of your documentation into it at that point and be like, how do I refine this or make it better? Better discoverability, better searching, that type of thing. So yeah, and our search system, any improvement was a good improvement because before it was Word documents that you hoped were titled some way that made you think I should open this and look because it was just on a shared drive on File Explorer, and it is very bare bones. You can't search very well there. So yeah, no, if I could go all the way to like full AI integrated search or like some platform that had an AI plugin for search, which some of them do, super nice. But I know some people are working on like more open source variants of that, but I haven't seen anything come to fruition outside of paid services.
You played with Google Notebook.
A little bit.
I just saw it this week and the like automatic podcast feature.
Has
was
anybody else
weird.
heard the podcast
Yeah.
generate? It is creepily
Very creepy.
Yeah, if you whatever your favorite podcast network, or if you listen to podcasts even once in a blue moon, the fact that it had created something that had a very like banter between two AI going through, and I've seen people feed complex medical jargon documents like late stage med school into it and went, hey, make a 15-minute podcast talking about this and explaining it in like layman's terms. Took them 2 minutes to put in and have it generate 15 minutes of content. And I listened to the 15 minutes and the two AI people were funny and were engaged.
They're very, yeah,
And
we
they-
entered like library newsletters.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were like, the library has X amount of cubic feet. That's so cool. And I
Yeah.
was like,
They,
what's happening?
they would like, they would break down complex terms in like layman's terms. They're like, oh, wait, when I'm thinking about that, that's a good way to explain it, which is unsettling, to say the least. But very interesting. So, anything else? Did Risen make sense? Like the whole, okay, good. The framework thing really helped me out. So the second I started mapping things like that to AI, it just improved dramatically. Awesome.
Would you mind going just back one screen?
It's,
And just looking at what else.
Yeah, and the slides should be available on the bottom of the conference open.
Awesome. This watched a video on Instagram. I started randomly following the library. Oh no, and he was talking about dynamic jobs.
I wonder, it might be